Okay, the next sound we're making is from Ben Bohmer's After Earth, and it's this lead sound that you hear over here. Alright, so I suggest pausing the video and then trying to remake it. I'll give you a hint. We're using the Dupe6 template, and we've got a bit of noise in there and another oscillator, and we've got some slight variation, so try and figure out how to make some variations. Okay, so when you're ready, unpause it and let's go. So I'm just going to duplicate this, and this is what the MIDI looks like. Sorry if you haven't copied that down yet. This is the MIDI, and I'm just going to turn off this EQ8, even though all it's doing is cutting out that low end. I'll just turn that off for now, and then I'm going to presets and make it to Dupe6. And that's what that sounds like at the moment. So we've got two oscillators. First one is or the second oscillator I'm using here is the saw wave, and the first one we're going to change it to noise. Then we just want to push this all the way to the right, the mix, so that we're only hearing the saw wave. Okay, then we're going to bring down the cutoff filter and open it up with the envelope. Okay, and I'm just going to bring up the sustain a little bit here. Okay, so with this synth, the thing that I found interesting when I listened to it first, and when you really pay attention to it, is that there's very slight variations in it that are kind of keeping it, a bit more organic. And Diva is great for doing these kind of things because it has this tab here called the trimmers. And the trimmers basically lets you control the detune of every single voice. And I've already been over this before, but just to give you a refresher, when I play this, you'll see each of these has a light that lights up every time a different voice gets played. So we have voices 1 to 8. So at the moment there's only 8 voices enabled, so we'll only hear these 8 over here. And then this has this thing called a voice map modulator. So you can essentially create modulations for each separate voice. If I turn these each slightly and then map on the synth, I can go in and map voice map. Then it's going to use all these different parameters each time a different note gets played or a different voice. So I've just glossed over that now, and we'll get back to that. But the main parts of this synth are that we've got this saw wave and the noise. So let me just mix in the noise a bit so you can hear it. So on first listen you might think, okay, that's what he's done. He's just mixed in the noise slightly. But if you pay attention, that noise kind of fades in and out randomly, and that's when we're going to use the trimmers and the voice map modulator. So over in modifications, we can actually map noise and dual VCO mix to something. So if I had to map it to envelope 2, for example, and turn it up. Sorry, that's the FM, which is actually a pretty cool sound. I didn't mean to do that one. So if we map this to envelope 2, so you start hearing the noise fade in. So what we're going to do is change that to voice map, and then turn it up slightly, and then we go into the trimmers, and on this voice map modulator we can start adjusting them. So you can hear when it hits the first voice, this one, you start to hear some of that noise come through. Okay, so maybe we have it over there on that one, and then a little bit less on this one, a little bit more here, maybe the same, a little bit less, a bit more, then maybe one that has like a big one, and a bit less. So we've already got some nice variation over here. Now another thing we can do to add variation is we can play with the detune. And I don't really hear him doing that much in this case, but just know that you can increase this detune amount, and then it'll use these parameters and basically detune each voice away from each other. But it can get pretty extreme if you use it too much. So we'll leave it down there for now. And then the other variation I'm hearing is that the cutoff filter is very slightly changing, randomly on each note. So I think what he's done is he's used this variance here on cutoff. So if you turn that up, you'll hear like each note has a very slightly different cutoff to it. And that's because of this. And you can use this button to generate random values for the cutoff filter. You don't have to hit it because it comes pre-generated with random numbers, but if you don't like how it sounds, you might want to just click that button and see if it sounds better. Okay, so we've got the main part of the synth done, and all I hear on the other one is that there's just a bit of reverb on there just to make it slightly wet, but not too much. Still want it to sound like nice and organic and almost dry. So I'll just bring down that wet. Okay, and then when we compare it to this one. Okay, so we still got a few more things that I did here, and one of them is to let's bring down this envelope. And bring up the decay a bit. Oops, sorry. Maybe a little bit brighter. Okay, then the last thing that I did was just to give it that little bit of grit that you hear. Okay, and that's not very obvious in his, but I just thought it sounded a lot better with that grit in it, and I think most people would agree. Kind of just, makes it a little bit dusty and just gives it some character. And one thing to make note of is using FM on the oscillator here, FM on the filter always sounds really good when you have some noise in the synth, because then you start hearing that noise like buzz through a bit and it gives it that grit. So, but it gets very extreme, so just use low values. Okay, so that's pretty much the same, maybe slightly bit more wet on ours. Okay, so things to remember, we're using the saw and the noise, and we're mixing that in using this modulation with a voice map, and we're setting those values on the voice map modulator over here. We're using a filter map to envelope 2, and we've got the FM from oscillator 1 on the cutoff to give it that bit of that buzz. We've got some variance here with the cutoff filter, and then it's just a little bit wet over here. And that's pretty much it for this sound. So I just thought it was a really interesting sound because at first listen it appears really simple, but when you pay attention to it, it's got all these like subtle variations that just make it a bit more interesting. Oh, and then lastly, I just put this EQ on because we'll have a bunch of sub coming through with that noise. So I'd just like to clean that up by removing that. Great. Hope you learned a thing or two, and I'll catch you the next one.